My name is Sarah Fowler and I am 29 years old. I still remember the sound my head made when it hit the marble floor. The wet crack that echoed through the foyer while my older sister Melissa stood over me, her designer Louboutin heels clicking as she stepped around my motionless body. The day my father, a renowned cardiac surgeon, looked at my drooping face and slurred speech and declared I was being dramatic. The day my mother accused me of ruining her perfect anniversary party while blood pooled beneath my skull. They had no idea that their dismissal of my traumatic brain injury would soon make them criminals. If you have ever had your medical emergency ignored by the people who should care the most, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button and stay for a story about the day my family's betrayal changed my life forever. Growing up in the Fowler household was like performing in a play where only one person knew the script. Our family appeared perfect from the outside. A sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, a father who was one of the state's most respected cardiac surgeons, a mother who graced the society pages as a philanthropist and former debutante, and two daughters who excelled academically. But appearances can be deceiving, especially when maintaining them becomes more important than the truth. My father, Dr. Richard Fowler, was a 6 feet 1 inch tower of clinical precision. A man who believed emotions were diagnostic weaknesses and vulnerability was a character flaw requiring surgical removal. He had built his reputation on perfection, both in the operating room and at home. Unfortunately, he expected his children to perform at the same superhuman standards, with no tolerance for anything less than excellence. "Success is the only language this family speaks," was his constant refrain throughout my childhood. Whether I was dealing with scraped knees, friendship troubles, or academic struggles, his response was always the same. Analyze the failure, correct the deficiency, perform better. There was no room for comfort, only improvement. My mother, Victoria Fowler, was not much better. While she occasionally showed glimpses of maternal instinct, her primary allegiance was always to the family's social standing and my father's expectations. She was an elegant woman who seemed perpetually afraid of any crack appearing in the perfect facade we presented to Greenwich society. If acknowledging my struggles meant admitting our family was anything less than ideal, she would choose denial every time. "What will people think?" she would ask whenever I expressed any need that might require outside attention. Drawing comparisons that cut deeper than any physical wound, she would remind me how much easier Melissa was to manage. Then there was Melissa, my older sister by 3 years, now 32. She had spent her entire life as the golden child, the daughter who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Brilliant, beautiful, and ruthlessly manipulative, Melissa learned early that she could get away with anything as long as she maintained her facade of perfection in front of our parents. She was a corporate lawyer married to an investment banker, living in the guest house on our family's property with her twin 5-year-olds, the picture of success by every metric our parents valued. I still remember when I was 8 and Melissa was 11. She had pushed me down the marble staircase in our foyer, the same staircase that would later become the site of my devastating injury. When I cried to our parents about my bruised ribs and scraped knees, Melissa claimed I had fallen because I was clumsy and not holding the banister. They believed her without question. At the emergency room, my father lectured me about spatial awareness while my mother worried about the medical bills and whether anyone from their social circle had seen us there. This pattern continued throughout our childhood and into our adult years. Melissa would torment me with pranks that crossed the line into cruelty, and our parents would either ignore her behavior or blame me for provoking her. When I was 15, Melissa sabotaged my science fair project on marine ecosystems, destroying weeks of research the night before the competition. When I told my parents, they suggested I should have been more prepared and not left everything to the last minute. The fact that I had been working on it for months, that Melissa had deliberately poured bleach on my coral samples, was irrelevant to their narrative. At 18, Melissa stole and destroyed my college acceptance letters, including a full scholarship to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. When I confronted our parents after discovering what she had done, they accused me of making up paranoid stories because I was jealous of her acceptance to Harvard Law. The scholarship had to be reissued, causing months of stress and uncertainty about my future. Throughout college, this disparity only grew more pronounced. Our parents paid for Melissa's law school in full, buying her a condo near Harvard and providing a generous living allowance. When I was accepted for my PhD in marine biology, they made it clear I was on my own financially. Marine biology is more of a hobby than a career, my father said. We cannot justify the investment when the earning potential is so limited. I took out loans, worked multiple jobs, and spent years paying for my education while Melissa glided through law school funded by our parents' generosity. But I was determined to prove that my chosen field had value, that I could build a meaningful career studying the ocean ecosystems I had loved since childhood. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I had learned to keep my distance from my family. I moved to Monterey, California, after completing my PhD, accepting a research position with the Pacific Marine Research Institute. I built a life for myself studying deep-sea coral ecosystems, found colleagues who respected my work, and started therapy to address the damage my upbringing had caused. I published papers on ocean acidification, consulted for environmental organizations, and slowly began to understand what healthy relationships looked like. But family ties are hard to sever completely, especially when guilt and obligation are weaponized against you with surgical precision. Which is why when my mother called 6 months ago to insist I attend my parents' 35th wedding anniversary celebration, I found myself reluctantly agreeing despite every instinct telling me to decline. It would mean so much to your father and me if you came, my mother said, though I suspected my presence was more about maintaining appearances than genuine desire for my company. We are having a garden party at the house. Everyone will be there. By everyone, she meant the upper echelon of Greenwich society, medical colleagues, country club friends, and extended family members who had witnessed my otherness throughout my childhood. The thought of spending an afternoon being interrogated about my little ocean project while listening to praise for Melissa's legal career made my stomach churn. But I had run out of excuses. My therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had been helping me practice setting boundaries with my family, and part of that work involved showing up authentically rather than avoiding them entirely. You have the right to leave at any time, she reminded me during our session before the trip. You are an adult now. You have agency that you did not have as a child. I packed an overnight bag, planning to stay at a hotel rather than in my childhood bedroom, which I learned had been converted into a playroom for Melissa's twins. Even that small boundary was important to me, a reminder that I was no longer under their control. I chose an outfit that would pass my mother's inspection while still allowing me to feel like myself. A navy blue silk dress, comfortable flats, and a light cardigan. Appropriate for a garden party, but not so formal that I felt like I was playing dress-up in someone else's costume. As I flew from California to Connecticut, I practiced the techniques Dr. Walsh had taught me for dealing with difficult family situations. Deep breathing, grounding exercises, reminding myself that I was successful and valued in my professional life, regardless of how my family made me feel. But all the therapy in the world could not have prepared me for what awaited me at that anniversary party. No amount of deep breathing could prevent the catastrophe that was about to unfold or heal the physical and emotional scars that would follow. I arrived at my parents' estate at precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, timing my entrance to coincide with the arrival of other guests. This was a deliberate strategy to minimize one-on-one interaction with my immediate family. In a crowd, it would be easier to blend in, to avoid becoming the sole target of their attention. The circular driveway was already filled with cars, most of them expensive luxury vehicles belonging to my parents' social circle. Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas gleamed in the afternoon sun, alongside a few classic cars that probably cost more than most people's homes. I recognized several vehicles, including the silver Porsche that belonged to my father's surgical partner and the white Range Rover driven by my mother's best friend from the country club. My mother greeted me at the front door with an air kiss and a once-over that told me my outfit had passed inspection, if just barely. "Sarah, darling, you made it. Everyone is out back in the garden. Your father is playing host by the pool." Of course, they had started the festivities without waiting for all the guests to arrive. It was a subtle reminder that my presence was not essential, merely tolerated. The living room was decorated with elaborate floral arrangements, crystal champagne flutes arranged on silver trays, and framed photographs from my parents' wedding 35 years ago. They looked impossibly young and glamorous in those pictures, my father in his military dress uniform from his brief service as an army surgeon, my mother in a designer gown that probably cost more than I made in a month as a graduate student. I followed my mother through the house to the back terrace, where French doors opened onto the manicured garden. The scene that greeted me was exactly what I had expected and dreaded. About 60 people, mostly adults in their 50s and 60s, drinking champagne and making polite conversation around the pool and garden areas. A string quartet played classical music from a gazebo near the rose garden, and white-coated servers circulated with hors d'oeuvres and drinks. My father was holding court near the bar, surrounded by his usual entourage of medical colleagues and golf partners. He had a martini in one hand and was gesturing animatedly with the other, likely regaling his audience with some story about a complicated surgery or his latest golf score. He had gained weight since I had last seen him, his once athletic frame now showing the effects of too many country club dinners and not enough exercise. When he spotted me, he broke away from his group and approached with the artificial enthusiasm of someone fulfilling a social obligation. "Sarah, there you are. I was beginning to wonder if you had gotten lost." His words were friendly enough, but there was an edge of criticism, a suggestion that I was somehow failing by not arriving earlier to help with preparations. "Happy anniversary, Dad," I replied, accepting his brief, awkward hug. "The garden looks beautiful. Your mother spent a fortune on those flowers," he said, gesturing toward the elaborate arrangements. "But you know how important these events are for maintaining relationships in our community." Again, the unspoken comparison hung in the air. These events mattered because they served a purpose, unlike my work studying marine ecosystems, which he had never considered worthwhile. I excused myself to find my mother and sister, hoping to complete my obligatory greetings quickly so I could find a quiet corner to blend into the background. I found them near the pool, where Melissa was introducing her twins to some family friends. Melissa looked stunning, as always. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her designer dress fit her like it had been made specifically for her body, and her makeup was flawless. She radiated the confidence that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong, surrounded by people who value and admire you. "Sarah," she exclaimed when she saw me, pulling me into a hug that was just a little too tight, a little too performative. "Look, everyone, my little sister the marine biologist is here." The words little sister and marine biologist were delivered with the kind of condescending affection that made my profession sound like a childhood phase I had never outgrown. Several people smiled politely, the way adults do when children show them crayon drawings. "How fascinating," said Mrs. Pemberton, one of my mother's bridge partners. "Are you still doing that ocean research?" "I study deep-sea coral ecosystems and their response to climate change," I replied, trying to inject some gravitas into my work description. "Currently, I am researching how ocean acidification affects coral reproduction in Pacific waters." "Oh, how nice," she responded with the blank smile of someone who had stopped listening after coral. "Melissa was just telling us about her promotion to senior partner. Such an impressive accomplishment at her age." And there it was, the inevitable comparison that had defined every family gathering since childhood. Melissa's achievements were impressive and noteworthy. Mine were interesting hobbies that polite people acknowledged before changing the subject. For the next 2 hours, I managed to navigate the social minefield by engaging in polite conversations with people who remembered me as the awkward younger daughter who was always causing some kind of drama. I nursed a single glass of wine and tried to project an image of calm professionalism while internally counting down the minutes until I could make my escape. But as the afternoon wore on and the champagne flowed freely, I could sense the dynamic shifting. The conversations became louder, more animated, and inevitably more personal. Several guests began sharing stories from the past, reminiscing about family gatherings and social events from years gone by. It was during one of these nostalgic conversations that Melissa decided to entertain the group with stories about our childhood. "Oh, you should have seen Sarah when she was younger," she said loudly enough for several conversations to pause. "She was so dramatic about everything. Once, she convinced herself that she was allergic to shellfish and made this huge scene at a restaurant. Turned out she just did not want to eat lobster because she thought it was cruel to the animals." The group laughed at this story, which Melissa had completely fabricated. I had never claimed to be allergic to shellfish, and the restaurant incident she was describing had never happened. But the truth was irrelevant when the story served her purpose of painting me as an overly sensitive child prone to making scenes. Or the time she locked herself in her room for 3 days because she said we were being mean to her, added my mother, joining in the storytelling. We finally had to call the maintenance man to remove the door from its hinges. She was perfectly fine, of course, just seeking attention. This story was also fabricated, but it followed a familiar pattern. Any time I had tried to protect myself from their cruelty by withdrawing, it was reframed as attention-seeking behavior. My legitimate pain became evidence of my inherent drama and instability. I felt my cheeks burning with the familiar mixture of embarrassment and rage that these stories always provoked. I had come here hoping to maintain some semblance of adult boundaries, but instead, I was being publicly humiliated for the entertainment of people I barely knew. I set down my wine glass and started to gather my purse. I had reached my limit, and no obligation to family was worth subjecting myself to this kind of public degradation. But as I turned to leave, Melissa intercepted me. "Leaving so soon? The party is just getting started." Her words were slurred slightly, her eyes bright with the combination of alcohol and the thrill of having an audience for her performance. She had always been more dangerous when she was drunk, more unpredictable, more willing to escalate conflicts beyond the point of social acceptability. "I have an early flight tomorrow," I lied, trying to step around her. It was lovely seeing everyone. But Melissa was not done with me yet. She had spent the afternoon being praised for her professional accomplishments and her beautiful family, basking in the approval that had always been her birthright. But apparently, that was not enough. She needed to ensure that I remained firmly positioned below her in the family hierarchy. "You know, Sarah," she said, her voice carrying across the garden, "I worry about you sometimes. Living all alone in California, no husband, no children. It must be so lonely." The comment was designed to wound, and it succeeded. At 29, I was perfectly content with my life and relationships, but in the context of my family's values, my single status was presented as evidence of failure and inadequacy. "I am quite happy with my life, actually," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "My work is fulfilling, and I have wonderful friends and colleagues." "Of course you do," Melissa said with the kind of patronizing smile that made my skin crawl. "But it is not the same as real family, is it? Real commitment." The implication was clear. My chosen family of friends and colleagues was somehow less valuable than the biological family that had spent decades making me feel unwanted and inadequate. The irony was not lost on me. I felt something inside me snap. 4 years, I had endured their subtle and not so subtle put-downs, their constant comparisons, their dismissal of my achievements and dreams. I had tried to maintain peace by staying away, by keeping my distance, but even that was not enough. They still felt entitled to attack me in public, to use me as entertainment for their social circle. "You know what, Melissa?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "I may not have the husband and children that you think define a woman's worth, but at least I built my life on my own merit instead of riding on daddy's money and connections." A shocked silence fell over the nearby conversations. In the Fowler family, we did not acknowledge the ways privilege had shaped our opportunities. We certainly did not call attention to how our parents' wealth and status had paved the way for Melissa's success while leaving me to struggle financially through graduate school. Melissa's face flushed red, whether from anger or embarrassment, I could not tell. "How dare you," she hissed. "After everything this family has done for you." "Everything this family has done for me." I laughed bitterly. "Like what, exactly? Like paying for your law school while making me take out loans for my PhD? Like converting my childhood bedroom into a playroom without even asking if I might want to visit? Like spending 30 years telling me I was not good enough while praising everything you did?" I could see several guests backing away from our confrontation, uncomfortable with the family drama that was unfolding in front of them. My parents were nowhere to be seen, probably inside dealing with catering details or greeting new arrivals. "You always were jealous," Melissa snarled, abandoning any pretense of sisterly affection. "Even as children, you could not stand that I was better at everything. Smarter, prettier, more successful. And now look at you, 30 years old and playing with fish for a living while I am a senior partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the country. The words hit me like physical blows, each one designed to target my deepest insecurities. But instead of shrinking away as I had done throughout childhood, I felt a surge of anger that gave me strength. I am not 30, I am 29, I said coldly. And I do not play with fish. I am a marine biologist with a PhD from one of the most respected research institutions in the world. I publish papers that contribute to our understanding of climate change and ocean conservation. Just because you do not understand the value of my work does not make it worthless. Melissa stepped closer to me, her face twisted with rage. Your work is worthless, she spat. You are worthless. You always have been, and you always will be. The only reason anyone tolerates you is because you are family, and even that is starting to wear thin. I had heard enough. 30 years of accumulated hurt and anger boiled over, and I decided I was done being the family scapegoat. I was done accepting their abuse in the name of maintaining peace. Go to hell, Melissa, I said, turning my back on her and walking toward the house. I am done with all of this. I pushed through the French doors into the living room, my heart pounding with adrenaline and the kind of righteous fury that comes from finally standing up to a lifetime bully. I needed to find my purse, call a cab, and get out of there before this confrontation escalated further. But Melissa was not finished with me. I heard her heels clicking on the marble floor behind me as she followed me into the house, her voice rising to a pitch that could probably be heard by the guests outside. Do not you dare walk away from me, she screamed. I am not done talking to you. I turned around in the foyer, the same marble-floored space where she had pushed me down the stairs 21 years earlier. Yes, you are done, I said firmly. I am leaving, and I do not want to hear from any of you again. That was when she lost control completely. Whatever restraint she had maintained for the sake of appearances vanished, and she lunged toward me with the kind of volcanic rage that had terrified me as a child. You ungrateful bitch, she shrieked, shoving me hard in the chest with both hands. After everything we have given you, this is how you repay us. The push sent me stumbling backward toward the 3 marble steps that led down to the sunken portion of the foyer. I felt my foot catch on the edge of the first step, my balance tilting dangerously as I tried to catch myself. For a split second, I thought I might be able to recover, might be able to grab the handrail or steady myself somehow. But my momentum was too great, and my foot slipped completely off the step. I fell backward, my body twisting as I tried instinctively to protect myself from the impact. The back of my head struck the marble floor with a sound I will never forget, a wet crack that seemed to echo through the foyer like a gunshot. Pain exploded through my skull, radiating outward in waves that made my vision blur and my stomach lurch. I could taste blood in my mouth and feel it beginning to pool beneath my head. But what terrified me more than the pain was the strange numbness that was spreading down the right side of my body. I tried to speak, to call for help, but my words came out slurred and incomprehensible. When I attempted to move my right arm, nothing happened. The signals from my brain seemed to disappear somewhere between my thoughts and my limbs. Melissa stood over me, her expression shifting from rage to shock as she realized what had happened. But instead of immediately calling for help, her first instinct was self-preservation. She tripped, she said loudly, speaking to no one in particular but establishing her version of events. Everyone saw her trip on her dress. I tried to speak again, to tell her I could not feel my right side, but my mouth would not cooperate. Half of my face felt heavy and unresponsive, and when I tried to form words, they came out as unintelligible sounds. Help, I managed to whisper, though I was not sure if anyone could hear me. Please help me. The first person to reach us was my mother, drawn by the sound of the argument and Melissa's shouting. When she saw me lying on the marble floor with blood spreading beneath my head, her immediate concern was not my well-being but the potential embarrassment to the family. What happened here? She demanded, looking back and forth between Melissa and me. People will hear the commotion. She tripped on her dress, Melissa repeated, her voice steadier now that she had time to compose herself. She was walking too fast in those shoes and just fell. I tried to shake my head, to contradict her lie, but the movement sent fresh waves of agony through my skull. She pushed, I slurred, hoping my mother would understand. Cannot feel, Right side. But instead of taking my words seriously, my mother knelt beside me with an expression of annoyance rather than concern. "Sarah, get up this instant," she hissed in a low voice. "You are making a scene, and we have guests." "Cannot get up," I managed to say, tears streaming down my face. "Something wrong. Need hospital." My father appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise, and I felt a surge of relief. Surely a cardiac surgeon would recognize the signs of serious injury and get me the medical attention I needed. "What is all this commotion about?" he asked irritably, as if we were children squabbling over toys rather than dealing with a medical emergency. "Sarah tripped and fell," my mother explained quickly. "She says she cannot get up, but I think she is just being dramatic." My father looked down at me with the clinical detachment he probably used when examining patients. But instead of seeing the obvious signs of traumatic brain injury, he saw only what he expected to see from me: attention-seeking behavior and manipulation. "Sarah, this is ridiculous," he said sternly. "You are a grown woman. Get up off the floor immediately." I tried to explain that I could not move my right side, that my speech was slurred, that something was seriously wrong with my brain, but he dismissed my symptoms as theatrics. "Walk it off," he said, using the same phrase he had used throughout my childhood whenever I was injured or in pain. "Stop being a baby. You are embarrassing yourself and this family in front of our guests." By this point, some of the party guests had begun to filter into the house, curious about the noise and drawn by the kind of morbid fascination that makes people slow down to look at car accidents. I could see them gathering in the doorway, whispering among themselves as they watched me lying helpless on the marble floor. "Maybe we should call an ambulance," suggested Mrs. Chen, one of my mother's friends who worked as a school nurse. "She really does not look well." "That is not necessary," my father said quickly. "She just had a little fall. There is no need to involve emergency services." But Mrs. Chen was not convinced. She knelt beside me and began checking my vital signs, her expression growing more concerned by the moment. "Her pulse is rapid, and her pupils are unequal," she reported. "This could be a serious head injury." "She is fine," my mother insisted, more concerned about the scene we were creating than my medical condition. "Sarah has always been prone to dramatics. She is just embarrassed about falling in front of everyone." As they argued over my condition, I felt myself slipping in and out of consciousness. The pain in my head was becoming unbearable, and the right side of my body remained completely unresponsive. I knew from my basic biology training that these were signs of serious brain injury, but my family's refusal to acknowledge my condition was making it impossible to get help. Then, through the fog of pain and confusion, I heard a new voice. Strong, authoritative, and blessedly medical. "Excuse me, I need to examine this patient immediately." Dr. James Chen, a neurologist and family friend, pushed through the crowd of onlookers and knelt beside me. Unlike my family, he recognized the symptoms of traumatic brain injury and began conducting a proper neurological assessment. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently. "Sarah," I managed to slur. "Can you squeeze my hand with your right hand?" I tried, but nothing happened. Dr. Chen's expression grew grave. "I need you to try to smile for me." When I attempted to smile, only the left side of my face moved. The right side remained drooped and unresponsive. Dr. Chen turned to address my parents, his voice firm and urgent. "This woman needs immediate emergency medical attention. These are clear signs of traumatic brain injury, possibly a stroke caused by the impact. Every minute we delay treatment increases the risk of permanent damage." "That is absurd," my father protested. "She just tripped and fell. There is no need for such dramatics." "Dr. Fowler, with all due respect, I am a neurologist," Dr. Chen replied coldly. "This patient is exhibiting classic signs of brain trauma. Right-sided weakness, facial drooping, slurred speech, and altered consciousness. If we do not get her to a hospital immediately, she could die." The word die seemed to penetrate my parents' denial, at least partially. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine concern cross my father's face. "Are you certain it is that serious?" my mother asked, finally acknowledging that this might be more than attention-seeking behavior. "I am calling an ambulance," Dr. Chen announced, pulling out his phone. and I strongly recommend that everyone step back and give her space. Moving her incorrectly could worsen the injury. As Dr. Chen spoke with the emergency dispatcher, I heard my father asking Melissa exactly what had happened. Her story had not changed. I had tripped on my dress and fallen down the steps. It was an accident, she insisted, just an unfortunate accident. But I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes, the growing realization that my injuries were too severe for such a simple explanation. And for the first time since the fall, I saw fear on Melissa's face. The fear of someone who was beginning to understand the potential consequences of their actions. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, their presence immediately transforming the atmosphere from social gathering to medical emergency. The lead paramedic, a woman named Jennifer, took control of the situation with the kind of professional competence that made me feel safe for the first time since I had fallen. "What happened here?" she asked Dr. Chen while her partner began assessing my vital signs. "The patient fell backward and struck her head on the marble floor," Dr. Chen explained. "She is exhibiting signs consistent with traumatic brain injury. Right-sided weakness, facial asymmetry, slurred speech, and intermittent loss of consciousness." Jennifer nodded, immediately understanding the seriousness of my condition. "We need to immobilize her neck and get her to the trauma center immediately," she told her partner. "This looks like a significant TBI." As they worked to stabilize me for transport, Jennifer asked the question that would change everything. "Was this fall witnessed? Can anyone tell me exactly how it happened?" Before anyone else could speak, Melissa stepped forward. "She tripped on her dress," she said firmly. "She was walking too fast and just fell down the steps." But Dr. Chen had been thinking about the mechanics of my injury, and something about Melissa's story did not add up. "The pattern of injury is not consistent with a simple trip and fall," he said carefully. "The force required to cause this level of brain trauma suggests she fell with significant momentum, possibly from being pushed or struck." A hush fell over the gathered crowd. The implication was clear, even if no one wanted to acknowledge it directly. "Are you suggesting this was not an accident?" Jennifer asked, her training in domestic violence cases making her alert to the possibility of assault. "I am simply noting that the injuries are more severe than would typically result from tripping over clothing," Dr. Chen replied diplomatically. As they loaded me onto the stretcher and prepared to transport me to the hospital, I heard Jennifer making additional calls on her radio. Along with requesting a trauma team, she was also requesting police presence at the hospital. "Standard procedure," she explained, "for cases involving potential assault." The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was Melissa's face, pale and frightened, as she watched the ambulance doors close. For the first time in our lives, she was facing real consequences for her actions, and she had no idea how to manipulate her way out of them. The next few days passed in a blur of medical procedures, diagnostic tests, and gradually emerging awareness of what had happened to me. I had suffered what doctors called a severe traumatic brain injury with associated stroke-like symptoms. The impact had caused bleeding in my brain, putting pressure on the areas that controlled movement and speech on the right side of my body. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the neurosurgeon who had performed emergency surgery to relieve the pressure in my brain, explained my condition with the kind of gentle honesty that I had never received from my own family. "The good news is that we were able to stop the bleeding and reduce the swelling," she told me during one of her daily visits. "The challenging news is that there has been some permanent damage to your motor cortex. You will likely have ongoing weakness on your right side, and your speech may be affected for some time." The full impact of her words took days to sink in. I was right-hand, and my career required precise manual dexterity for laboratory work, sample collection, and data recording. The fine motor control I had taken for granted was now compromised, possibly permanently. But the medical crisis was only part of the story unfolding around me. The police investigation into my injury had revealed inconsistencies in the witness statements, particularly regarding the circumstances of my fall. Detective Maria Rodriguez visited me in the hospital 3 days after my injury, when I was finally stable enough to give a coherent statement. "Several witnesses reported hearing a loud argument between you and your sister before your fall," she explained gently. "And Dr. Chen has documented injuries that are not consistent with a simple trip and fall." I told her what I could remember, The escalating argument, Melissa's rage, the push that sent me backward into the marble steps. Detective Rodriguez took careful notes, her expression growing more serious as I described the pattern of abuse that had characterized my relationship with my family for decades. "Your sister has given a statement claiming that you tripped on your dress," she informed me. "But we have reason to believe that may not be the complete truth." 2 days later, Detective Rodriguez returned with news that would forever alter my family's dynamics. "We have arrested your sister on charges of assault causing grievous bodily harm," she told me. "The evidence suggests that she pushed you, causing your fall and subsequent injuries." The news should have brought me satisfaction, but instead, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that someone finally believed me, anger that it had taken a traumatic brain injury for anyone to take Melissa's violence seriously, and sadness that our family would never recover from this revelation. My parents, faced with the reality of criminal charges against their golden child, responded exactly as I expected them to. They hired expensive lawyers, maintained Melissa's innocence, and began a campaign to discredit my version of events. They never visited me in the hospital. Not once during my 3-week stay did they come to check on my condition or offer support during my recovery. Instead, they focused all their energy on protecting Melissa from the consequences of her actions. The civil lawsuit that followed was both necessary and heartbreaking. My attorney, Michael Greenberg, explained that the cost of my medical care, rehabilitation, and accommodation for my disabilities would likely exceed $2 million over my lifetime. "Your sister's assault has fundamentally altered your ability to work and live independently," he told me during one of our meetings. "The financial impact will be enormous, and someone needs to be held accountable." The settlement, reached 8 months after my injury, provided some financial security but could not restore what I had lost. My parents were forced to sell their estate and liquidate much of their retirement savings to meet the judgment. Melissa's legal career was effectively over, her conviction making it impossible for her to maintain her law license. But perhaps more devastating to them than the financial consequences was the social fallout. The story of the assault became public record, and the Greenwich social circle that had been so important to my parents quickly distanced themselves from the scandal. The country club memberships, the charity boards, the medical society connections that had defined my parents' identity all became sources of whispered conversations and awkward encounters. Their carefully constructed reputation lay in ruins, destroyed by the daughter they had protected and enabled for 32 years. Meanwhile, I began the long process of rebuilding my life around my new limitations. The rehabilitation center where I spent 2 months was a revelation in itself. For the first time, I was surrounded by medical professionals who took my symptoms seriously, who worked with me rather than dismissing my experiences. My speech therapist, Linda, helped me regain clarity in my speaking, though I still struggled with complex words when I was tired. My occupational therapist, Marcus, taught me adaptive techniques for daily living activities, from writing with my non-dominant hand to preparing meals with limited fine motor control. But perhaps most important was my physical therapist, David, who helped me understand that recovery was not about returning to my previous abilities but about maximizing what function I retained. "Your brain is remarkably plastic," he told me during one particularly frustrating session where I could not grip a pen properly. "It is already finding new pathways around the damaged areas. Your job is to give it as many opportunities as possible to make those connections." Slowly, painfully, I began to see progress. My right hand regained enough function to hold objects, though my fine motor control remained severely compromised. I could walk without assistance, though I tired easily and sometimes dragged my right foot. My speech became clearer, though I still struggled with complex sentences when I was exhausted. More challenging than the physical recovery was processing the emotional trauma of what had happened. The brain injury had affected more than just my motor skills. It had also impacted my ability to regulate emotions and process stress. I found myself crying at unexpected moments, overwhelmed by situations that previously would not have bothered me. Dr. Patricia Williams, the neuropsychologist assigned to my case, helped me understand that these changes were a normal part of traumatic brain injury recovery. "Your emotional regulation center was affected by the injury," she explained during one of our sessions. What you are experiencing is not weakness or instability. It is your brain adapting to new neural pathways while healing from trauma. Working with Dr. Williams, I began to understand that my injury was not just the result of one violent moment but the culmination of a lifetime of family dysfunction. The constant invalidation, the gaslighting, the protection of my abuser at the expense of my safety, all of it had contributed to creating an environment where such violence was possible. Your family failed you in the most fundamental way, Dr. Williams said during one particularly difficult session. They had one primary responsibility: to keep you safe and support your well-being. Instead, they consistently prioritized their comfort and reputation over your basic needs. This recognition was both liberating and devastating. Liberating because it validated decades of feeling like something was fundamentally wrong with my family dynamics. Devastating because it meant accepting that the people who should have loved me unconditionally were incapable of basic empathy and care. 6 months after my injury, as I was transitioning from inpatient rehabilitation to outpatient therapy, I received an unexpected visit from my mother. She appeared at my temporary apartment in Hartford, where I was staying while completing my recovery, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said when I answered the door, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. I invited her in, curious despite myself about what had prompted this first contact since my injury. "I want you to know that your father and I never intended for any of this to happen," she began, settling into the adaptive chair that had been provided for my limited mobility. I waited for more, for some acknowledgement of their role in dismissing my injury or enabling Melissa's violence, but it never came. "Melissa is facing serious prison time," she continued. "The lawyers say there is nothing more we can do to help her. She may lose her children, her career, everything." I felt a familiar surge of anger. Even now, even after everything, her primary concern was protecting Melissa from consequences rather than acknowledging the harm that had been done to me. "She pushed me down marble steps and caused a traumatic brain injury that has permanently altered my life," I said as calmly as I could manage. "Those consequences seem proportional to her actions." My mother's face crumpled. "She says it was an accident. That she just pushed you away and you fell. She never meant for you to be hurt so badly." "Mom," I said, using every technique Dr. Williams had taught me about setting boundaries, "the intent does not matter. The impact does. And this was not an isolated incident. Melissa has been violent toward me for decades, and you and Dad consistently protected her while dismissing my experiences." "That is not true," my mother protested weakly. "We treated you both equally. You paid for her law school and made me take loans for my PhD. You converted my childhood bedroom into a playroom without asking. You dismissed every injury, every complaint, every cry for help as attention-seeking behavior. Even when I was lying on your foyer floor with obvious signs of brain trauma, you were more concerned about your party guests than my medical needs." My mother sat in silence for a long moment, perhaps finally confronting the reality of their parenting. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What can we do to fix this?" "Nothing," I replied honestly. "You cannot fix 30 years of emotional abuse with an apology. You cannot undo a traumatic brain injury with regret. The time to protect and support me was throughout my childhood and on the day I was injured. You chose not to do those things." She left that day without saying goodbye, and I never saw her again. Melissa's criminal trial took place 8 months after my injury. I testified about the assault itself and the pattern of violence that had preceded it, though my speech was still sometimes halting and I had to take frequent breaks due to cognitive fatigue. The defense attorney tried to paint me as an unreliable witness, suggesting that my brain injury had affected my memory and perception. But the physical evidence was overwhelming. The severity of my injuries, the witness statements, Dr. Chen's medical testimony about the inconsistencies in the trip and fall story, all of it supported the prosecution's case. Melissa was convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 3 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 18 months. During her sentencing, the judge noted the particularly egregious nature of the crime, committed against a family member who had been trying to leave a hostile situation. The defendant showed a callous disregard for her sister's safety, Judge Martinez stated. and the family's subsequent failure to provide appropriate medical attention suggests a pattern of minimizing the victim's well-being in favor of protecting the defendant. My parents were not charged criminally, but the civil suit held them liable for their negligent response to my medical emergency. The financial settlement provided security for my ongoing medical needs, but it could not restore my previous capabilities or repair our fractured family relationships. A year after my injury, I made the decision to relocate permanently to California. Connecticut held too many painful memories, and I needed space to build a new identity that was not defined by trauma and dysfunction. The process of adapting my career to my new limitations was challenging but ultimately rewarding. While I could no longer conduct detailed laboratory work or underwater fieldwork, I discovered a talent for policy analysis and environmental advocacy. My experience with brain injury also gave me insights into disability rights that enhanced my perspective on accessibility in research and education. I began working as a consultant for marine conservation organizations, focusing on policy development and public education. The work was intellectually stimulating and meaningful, allowing me to contribute to ocean protection efforts in new ways. More importantly, I started building the kind of relationships I had never experienced with my biological family. Friendships based on mutual respect, romantic relationships that honored my autonomy, professional connections that valued my contributions. For the first time, I was experiencing what healthy attachment looked like. I met Thomas at a brain injury support group 2 years after my assault. He had sustained his injury in a motorcycle accident and was working as a disability rights attorney. Our shared experience of neurological trauma created an immediate understanding that deepened into love. With Thomas, I learned what it felt like to be believed without question, supported without conditions, and loved for exactly who I was rather than who someone expected me to be. When I had difficult days with my speech or motor skills, he never made me feel deficient or burdensome. When I struggled with the emotional effects of my injury, he held space for my feelings without trying to fix or minimize them. "You are not broken," he would remind me during my darkest moments. "You are adapting, healing, becoming something new." 3 years after my injury, Thomas and I married in a small ceremony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The guest list included chosen family, friends, colleagues, medical professionals who had supported my recovery, and fellow brain injury survivors who understood our journey. My biological family was notably absent, a decision I made without regret. During our vows, I spoke about how trauma had taught me the difference between surviving and thriving, between existing in relationships and being truly seen and valued. Thomas spoke about how our shared experience of neurological differences had shown him new dimensions of resilience and adaptation. It was the happiest day of my life, not despite my injury but incorporating it into a larger story of growth and renewal. As I write this now, 5 years after that terrible day in my parents' foyer, I can honestly say that my life has meaning and joy that I never could have imagined. I am not the same person I was before my injury, physically, cognitively, or emotionally. But the person I have become is stronger, more authentic, more compassionate, and more aware of what really matters. I still have days when the physical limitations frustrate me, when the cognitive fatigue overwhelms me, when the loss of my original life plans feels unbearable. But I also have days filled with laughter, meaningful work, deep friendships, and love that accepts me completely. My relationship with my biological family remains severed, and I have made peace with that reality. Melissa was released from prison after serving 20 months and now lives in Florida with supervised visitation rights to her children. My parents moved there as well, apparently starting over in a community that does not know their history. I occasionally receive second-hand news about them through distant relatives, but their story no longer has power over mine. I have learned that validation must come from within, that my worth is not determined by their recognition or approval. Recently, I received a letter from Melissa. It was the first direct communication from any family member in over 3 years. The letter was long, handwritten, and appeared to be a genuine attempt at accountability. She wrote about the therapy she had completed in prison, her growing understanding of the harm she had caused, and her recognition of the family dynamics that had enabled her behavior. She made no excuses and asked for nothing in return, not even forgiveness. I understand if you never want to hear from me again, she concluded. I would not blame you. But I wanted you to know that I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you, not just that day, but throughout our lives. You deserved so much better from all of us. The letter left me with complicated emotions. It seemed sincere, more honest than any communication I had ever received from my family. But I was not ready to let Melissa back into my life, if I ever would be. The brain injury had taught me that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation, and healing does not require maintaining relationships with people who have harmed us. I kept the letter but did not respond. Perhaps someday I will feel differently, but for now, my energy is focused on the life I am building rather than the family I left behind. That life includes meaningful work advocating for ocean conservation and disability rights. It includes a marriage built on genuine partnership and mutual respect. It includes friendships with people who see my worth and celebrate my accomplishments. It includes a chosen family that supports me through challenges without making me feel like a burden. Most importantly, it includes a relationship with myself based on self-compassion rather than self-criticism, acceptance rather than shame, truth rather than the distorted narratives that once defined my existence. If you are watching this and find yourself in a situation where your pain is dismissed, where your medical concerns are minimized by people who should protect you, please know that you deserve better. Your symptoms are real, your suffering matters, and there are people who will believe you and support you if you can find the courage to seek them out. If you have survived traumatic brain injury, please know that recovery is not linear but it is possible. Your brain is more adaptable than you might imagine, and your worth is not determined by your cognitive or physical abilities. If you have experienced family trauma, please know that healing does not require reconciliation with those who harmed you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is create distance from toxic relationships and invest your energy in building healthier connections. Have you ever had your medical emergency dismissed by people who should have protected you? How did you find the strength to advocate for yourself when those closest to you refused to believe your pain? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support this channel, and share with anyone who might need this message. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember, healing is not about returning to who you were before trauma. It is about becoming who you are meant to be, incorporating your experiences into a larger story of resilience, growth, and hope.